Welcome everybody. We're about to get started with the stream. Thank you for joining us, all the people that are here now, if you're here now, or the people that will join us later, or everyone who's going to watch this later on YouTube. So this is our stream on the neuroscience behind video games, and as part of the GamePad online, we're having these discussions around various topics in the video games industry as we do our part to promote inclusion and diversity in the games industry and just like demystify parts of the culture. So my name is Nigel, and I'm the co-founder of the manga brand Mayamada and organizer of the GamePad online event.
I am Tazziii. I'm a streamer and co-host.
And for anyone who doesn't know us, which is, to be fair, is probably most people in the world. So for those people, so Mayamada is a manga brand, and alongside our illustrator Pinelli, I write and self-publish manga-style comics within our universe of characters. And you can see some of the characters on the sides of this overlay. So these are some of the characters from our universe. There you go. And GamePad in particular is our social gaming event we started in 2015. We've been running physical events since then. Obviously, by necessity, have now added an online component to that. So we've been doing online events since the pandemic, pretty much. I think that would be our new tagline, like GamePad online events since the pandemic.
Since the pandemic. Established pandemic.
So we had our second online event last month, and we've also been doing like bonus streams, and this is part of the GamePad online community. So we've got more events, some more community stuff to come. I'll be talking about that at the end. But before we get there, I'm going to introduce our guest for today. So we're going to be talking to Michiel Smit, who is a neuroscience and gaming researcher and also the author of the book Game Boy, A Story of Video Game Addiction. Michiel, welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Nigel. Good to be back.
Yeah, so Michiel was with us on our video games and well-being panel in September. So we had a good chat about different aspects of video games and well-being, mental health being a big part of that. And because of Michiel's background and experience, there was just a lot to say in that part. So we thought, let's bring him back and dig in a bit more into all of that. So yeah, we're gonna just fire some questions. Basically, this is going to be like an hour-long question and answer session with Michiel. So we're going to mine his brain for information about how our brains work when we play video games. So we're going to put Michiel's social media up in the chat, so you guys can follow him, see more of his work. We're going to have, or we'll put it in the video description if you're watching this on YouTube. You can send us your feedback and questions in the chat. You can also send us questions or any feedback in our Discord community or old-fashioned email, which, to be fair, I still use most of the time, feedback@mayamada.com. And we're also on social media. So we've got, if I've done this overlay correctly, we've got like our social media running across the bottom there. So you can find us on Twitter. We are also Mayamada Tees on Instagram. So yeah, we're just going to get straight into this discussion. So as I mentioned, this is something that it has followed on from our previous video games and well-being panel discussion, which you can check out on YouTube. And we wanted to cover different areas and delve deeper into the neuroscience aspect, because that just seemed like an interesting area to gain a better understanding of what happens when we play video games, what happens to our brain. So as I mentioned, Michiel has a book about his personal journey through video game addiction. And I encourage everyone, if you haven't already, to check out that panel where he just outlines a lot of his story. So we won't go into that for today, but we will start by talking about video game addiction. So my first question is for you, Michiel, is sort of where you are now, just out of interest, what's your relationship with gaming today? Like, do you still play games, or is it just purely on the research side of things?
Oh yeah, so I after 10 years of abstinence, because I stopped playing video games when I was 19, I went cold turkey. I had a relapse once when I was like 21, but I hadn't played ever since. And then I started writing my second book also on video games, but then more the neuroscience about video games. And then I thought like, yeah, well, it's been so long. I better check out what the state of the art gaming industry is up to, so that I can still see if like my message is very relevant and actual. And so I've played a few of the newest games like the Fortnite and the Apex Legend and League of Legends. And though League of Legends is not very new, but like some of the most well played games of the moment. As sort of in a research kind of fashion. And yeah, that was a pretty intense experience because after 10 years of abstinence, I still notice all the circuits like getting online and getting very eager, very overly eager to like, oh yeah, I'm doing research. Yes. Yeah, so that was, that was yeah.
That's
was
the
an
best
interesting
thing.
experience.
Like it's for research. What do you mean? Like,
I'm trying to better humanity here.
Yeah.
You've become a meme. Like, live in the meme. It's for research.
And you could actually say that. Actually, so just since you took such a long break, what was your thoughts on just gaming in general? Not even necessarily related to addiction, but just video games, having taken a complete like break and coming back to it.
You mean from a personal? Because I mean,
just a personal experience.
Yeah. Well, I guess
like, is it better for you, or was it?
Yeah, it's far more social now because, of course, when I started off when I was 5, and then until I was 11, it was fine video games, but because it was social, and then with the transition to secondary school, it became kind of it turned from playing for fun to playing to take like stress and frustration away, and it became also less social. And so sort of more an isolating activity. And now that I turn to it again more for research, also try to play socially, so with friends, and that is I don't really play regularly. Like it's like a few times a month maybe, and then a few months not, and then Okay. So it's not a thing in my life right now. Gaming, also still a bit slippery if I would do it, but I do notice it's far nicer to do it in a social context.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. So in terms of your research, how does addiction, and specifically video game addiction, impact the research you do today?
So I'm not sure. Do you want to know like about how games can cause addiction, or do you mean like how? Because that's basically the big thing that we are only just recently are coming to terms with the fact that video games have this addictive potential, which is a bit crazy. If you go, 10 years ago, that would have been a very marginal and more controversial position. And now it's more, accepted, but it's very new. It's a very new thing that we don't have to ingest drugs. We don't have to smoke something. We don't have to inject something, which was how we traditionally kind of conceptualized addictions, as taking some substance. But you can also get addicted from just getting a certain stream of information onto your retina. And that's a pretty new thing. So I guess there's so many question marks we have. We don't really know what all the long-term and short-term effects are, who gets addicted, who doesn't, when people are more prone to become addicted, if there are certain games that have more addictive potential, how you could rate the addictive potential of a game, because of course they're not all the same. Like Super Mario is definitely different from Fortnite in addictive potential. So there's a huge amount of questions, but there's also hundreds of labs around the world now all trying to tackle those questions.
Yeah. And so what do you do day to day? Like what is the day to day of a neuroscience researcher?
Well, currently I'm mostly writing on my second book and doing some other work. But as a researcher, you read a lot of papers every day. Like you read what other researchers around the world have done, and you try to come up with your own questions and methods for how to solve, like how to get new insight. So the research I've done so far is systematic reviewing. So I haven't done I haven't worked with participants yet. So I've gathered all the data on brain imaging in resting state gamers. So I look at all the research that has been done that invites gamers and non-gamers into sitting still in a brain scanner, basically, and just doing nothing. And then they scan their brain and they look at the differences between the resting state of the brain between a gamer and a non-gamer. And they have some 50 to 60 of these studies now from the last 15 decades. And I've kind of summarized all the results from those studies. And yeah, it's pretty crazy. You find a lot of differences between how the brain in resting state functions between gamers and non-gamers.
Mm. And Tazziii, were you going to say something? You had that
no, I'm just taking it all in. I'm very intrigued by the resting state brain. I recently read a book called Frazzled by Ruby. I forgot the last name. Which she talks about the book's about mindfulness. And especially with now so much information we're taking in constantly, and how if you're someone that does get frazzled a lot, can you change your resting state by practicing mindfulness and meditation and all that fun stuff. So it's just very intriguing. Yeah.
Okay. I thought this was I'm about to drop some deep question on there. I need to adjust my Tazziii look detector. So all right, so we got a picture of the work that you do. Another kind of foundational thing I wanted to kind of get out is, what does it mean to be addicted to video games? Because we hear that it tends to be in the media, sort of video game addiction and the fear around that. What does it actually mean? If I'm someone who plays a few hours a day, am I addicted? Where's the line?
Yeah, so it's not so much. There's several lines. I mean, the official one from the WHO, the World Health Organization, is not so much that it matters how many hours a day you play, but mostly whether your gaming is keeping you from doing other relevant things in life, and it's escalating. And if you try to stop it, you just really, it doesn't work. You can't really get your gaming behavior under control. And if those three things are present in their estimate for a year, then you would classify someone as a video game addict. But yeah, that's sort of clinically how they define someone with a video game addiction. There's other ways to go about it too. I mean, what I found personally very relevant is the nature of your engagement with video games. So, for example, you could play for fun and just really enjoy a game, and there's probably not that much harm. But when you're addicted, your engagement changes from playing for fun to playing to take away pain. And if you play a lot of video games, you're addicted, and you it kind of is it's convergent with the definition of the WHO, because if you kind of neglect many life domains to play video games, then of course you will be frustrated in some ways. You'll have less social contacts. Maybe your performance on work or school is going down, or on sports, and so you will always have frustration if you play a huge amount of video games. And but these frustrations, that's the irony of video game addiction. You can really subdue or tranquilize or these kind of frustrations with playing more video games. And that is sort of another way of looking at it, that if you don't play for fun, but you play to sort of self-medicate, that could also be, I would say personally, that's for me a really big indication. If I work with kids who seek help, and that's something I want to find out, hey, because if you're just playing for fun, you're playing 5 hours a day, it's a bit much. You should definitely watch out, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an addiction. Some people can do that. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess it's the dependency on it, right? That's kind of what...
Yeah, so that's more in the official, that it becomes the compulsion that you cannot control. Yeah. And the neuroscience behind that it's wildly interesting, because it's basically the same. It really uses the same mechanisms that you would see in traditional addictions, concerning alcohol and nicotine and other illicit drugs. It's the basic premise is that these behaviors hijack your reward system. They really give you a flush of the dopamine, which is sort of the currency of the reward system. A lot of dopamine means like, wow, it signals to your brain like, this is awesome, this is amazing, give me more of this. And video games are really well capable of opening sort of the floodgates of dopamine in your reward system, just like any other drug. And so your brain just translates the behavior of gaming as something highly rewarding and highly significant. And that creates the compulsion that you were talking about, Tazziii.
And like, I think, was it 2 years ago, the WHO declared gaming disorders a behavioral addiction. And so for you as a researcher, what was your impression of that decision? Because, and this is part of the reason why we did the initial panel and why I wanted to talk to you now, is I get a lot of, well, not just me, but I see a lot of sort of pushback to things like that. So you tend to get things where from, let's say, like sort of typical media, you might get a news report on the BBC about gaming addiction. And for people who maybe don't engage with games as much, but maybe see like their son or their daughter or a younger relative just playing games, and they kind of lump that in with addiction. So when stories come out about, so-and-so has spent this many hours in gaming and this is how it's impacted their life, they go, oh, video games, you play video games and you'll become addicted, which isn't necessarily the case. It's not like a one-to-one. But then on the flip side, like for people who do play games, there's almost like there's nothing wrong with video games and it's all fine, which also it isn't necessarily the case. So when I saw the WHO kind of declare sort of gaming as a sort of potential behavioral addiction, there was a lot of pushback. But what did you think as someone who researches this and the reaction you saw to that decision?
It was great. I mean, it was based on like a huge amount of research studies and sort of there was quite a big consensus, because they don't take these kind of decisions lightly. There was pushback, and the pushback in a way had some really valid points. That it's, for example, really hard to come up with concrete definition of someone who's a gaming addict, because what I've just said, like the definition of gaming addiction is much borrowed from traditional addictions and gambling addiction. So in that sense, it's not a very novel, it's just sort of taking gambling addiction and replacing gambling for gaming. And some researchers who were opposed to the decision didn't really like that, and were afraid that, you're kind of making an addiction this way, and you put the whole thing on a confirmatory trajectory that if you create gaming addiction, you start looking for it, you'll find it. I didn't really quite agree. That's one on personal experience, that I, as a 12-year-old, became highly addicted to video games, and that lasted until I was 19. And I've spoken since then to many addicts from all different streets, and there was just an overwhelming recognition in their stories and my story, and the behavioral side. And I think it's really good. Like, we shouldn't start stigmatizing gaming, and like it's a minority. We don't know how big the minority is. It could be 5%, but it could also be 15 or 20% who gets addicted. So, but those are still really big numbers. That's like either 1 in 20 or 1 in 5.
Yeah, particularly as gaming sort of grows as an industry and more people.
And that's the other side, that it's one of the most innovative or like vastly innovating industries in the world. So, look at it like, for example, cigarettes. Ever since cigarettes were made, maybe the nicotine has gone up a little bit, but the system is the same. You smoke nicotine, you get addicted. But with video games, it's like a whole constellation of stimulating sort of gaming elements that are aimed at your brain on the other side of the screen. And these elements are being upgraded and being added. So the addictive potential of video games is getting higher and higher and higher, in which I sometimes liken to like the breeding of hashish or weed. Like they make it stronger and stronger every year. Yeah, I'm from Amsterdam. That's like really a thing here, that it's become way too strong. And so all the tourists, they just flip out whenever they enter a coffee shop here in Amsterdam, which is a different coffee shop from anywhere else around the world. But that's also what happens with video games. Like they're kind of, it's not really breeding, but like they're developing better and better video games. So yeah, if it's now 5%, it could well be 10% in 5 years. And of course, there is the scenario in which they make games so good and so exactly what your brain wants and exactly pressing all the buttons that virtually everyone is prone to become addicted to video games. I mean, it's a complete dystopic kind of thing, or like
it's called Ready Player One. That's a
nice one. I've seen that one. Yeah.
Tazziii has
I kind of like that. I was like,
I wanted to comment or ask or prompt something, I don't know, poke around, I guess, on like the language that's used when we do talk about video game addiction. And like you said, like having that stigma towards gaming, because obviously we have this like the stereotypical gamer that we're starting to get rid of that. And like, so people that still somehow don't know much about gaming really don't understand how that's a thing now, but it still is. But like how they suddenly, like they just see gaming and this like addiction, and when it is sort of spoke about without having proper education and proper questioning why and how, and like what sort of language and education we can add, and what language we should be using to sort of like talk about it without like brandishing gaming as bad without you know,
super important. Because it's not like games are. And that's maybe the problem. I mean, all gaming starts out as a ton of fun, and most gaming remains a ton of fun, and that's just awesome. I mean, it's great that we can invent stuff that is just really entertaining in our pastime, and actually can be quite a creative and cooperative thing. So for most people, it starts out as fun and it stays fun, and that's, I think, where we do have to develop this new language around the insight, as you rightly mentioned, about that there's also addictive potential. I think that language you want to center that maybe around connectedness, like maybe also fulfillment, like because in any human life there's so many domains. You're playing chess on so many boards. You have a relationship with your parents, you have a relationship with your friends, you have a relationship with your dreams and your ambitions and aspirations, and with your body. And then I think you want to harmonize, like you want to feel like you're really getting the best out of those different life domains, or at least good enough for you. And maybe that's where we can sort of start navigating the landscape between just playing for fun and addiction. Is like, how does your gaming behavior affect all your other life domains? If all other life domains, you just have a healthy relationship with friends, you have a romantic relationship, you're doing well in whatever school or work, or then there's not really a problem. If you can do that, then you can also play 5 hours of I don't know, World of Warcraft every day. But you manage to do all those other things too. Well, great. I mean, then maybe you genetically were not very predisposed to gaming addiction. Maybe, so it doesn't really matter. But I think it's important, to not see games as essentially evil, but mostly we engage with them within the context of our lives. So we have to look at the context of our lives. And and I usually ask kids who play a lot, like, okay, so if you stop playing, how do you feel the moment you stop, and how do you feel the moment you start? Because when I was an addict myself, when I would start playing video games, every time I came back from school, I would always feel sort of oh no, as it was like sort of a cat clawing with its claws to not go to the little computer room, and I would feel sort of agitated, and it would feel always a bit dirty. And also when I stopped playing after like
to play.
Yeah. When I was addicted, not when I was not addicted. When I was sort of fun in primary school, it just felt great. Like, hey, let's have a ball. Let's play some games. But then when I was addicted, I deep down I did notice, like a part of me noticed that I was losing agency and I was losing sort of some freedom. And agency and freedom, autonomy are really core needs of any human being as well. And you will feel when those needs are under threat. So I think many video game addicts, if they would like just pause for a moment and take a little snapshot of their mental landscape before they engage in video gaming, they would be able to feel like, it doesn't feel quite right. This doesn't feel, but then the problem was for me, I felt it, but I didn't know what to do with it because I didn't see any other options to really scratch the itch that I wanted to scratch with playing video games. Like I wanted to be way more connected with friends and I wanted to be way better at all kinds of sports, but those things require very complex actions. You have to train a lot. You have to say the right things to your friends. You have to get intimate with them. And it's just so much easier to press a button and transform yourself into this super avatar. So even though I felt like I shouldn't have been playing that much, I didn't know what to do with those feelings. But it can be helpful to be aware of those kind of feelings. And then also the feelings when you stop. Because when I stopped playing video games, I would always be super with myself. Like, because every day I would wake up not thinking, let's game the whole day. No, I would wake up, okay, this time I'm going to learn to do some trick on a skateboard like all my friends can do. I will learn this song on my guitar. I will, I don't know, do my homework or like get interested in something, like find some passion or something. And then I would find myself like after a 5-hour gaming binge with my parents calling like, hey, dinner's ready. And I would be really with myself. Like, yeah. And then the fun thing is that I would then after dinner, I would try to sort of subdue that self-frustration with playing more video games because those were the things that gave me a high. And so I felt, and that's the trap with gaming is that the more low you feel because you're gaming in kind of makes you realize less of your potential, and that hurts. But then the video games come to the rescue with kind of taking the pain away and giving you that sort of sense of I mean, it's superhuman, right? You're in that game. You're doing like, you're acting so fast. You're being super accurate. You're making decisions with like millisecond rapidity. And like you get into this flow and in that flow, all the pain about like dreams that you haven't really fulfilled, friends you haven't spoken to in a way that you wanted, romantic interests you haven't pursued it. In the stream of video games, all those things kind of wash away, and then at least in the game you feel great. The language we have. Yeah, I think that's what we're doing right now, building the language around that, and
So, and in terms of like different types of addiction, what's the difference when it comes to being addicted to video games versus, like you mentioned, sort of quote unquote traditional types of video? Is there a difference between video games and say addiction to cigarettes?
Absolutely.
You disappeared on I just seen you might have to go to the right, to your right. There you go. Yeah, so I just don't realize I looked over, you like disappeared. So just let people know I made up these like 3-panel overlays, and I'm like, oh wow, this is how streaming works. So now I understand like where people have to sit and everything. But that's about me. We're talking about you. So yes, what's the? So yeah, if the differences between different types of addiction.
Yeah, so there's really big differences. You also see, I mean, we can't really go into it, but you see it in the brain also. I mean, there's overlap between different types of addiction in what you can see in brain scanners and brain imaging research. There's a lot of overlap, but there's also differences. And I mean, it's a bit too in-depth to maybe name all those differences. Also, I wouldn't know them all by heart because the brain is huge. But the one thing that is really interesting, of course, is that video game addiction is something that happens to the onset is probably far younger. because you can play video games when you're like 2 or 3, like you have games for babies, basically. So that's one thing. Then the other thing is you can be a gaming addict for free. Like cigarettes, you have to actually spend quite a lot of money if you're addicted to cigarettes. And gaming, you can game for free. I played all my games almost for free, and especially these days.
I never even considered that.
No, the whole model of gaming, it was premium. You had to buy a game. Okay, well, you paid 25 euros for Warcraft or whatever. That's not that much, but still you had to pay something. Now everything is freemium. League of Legends, Apex Legends, Fortnite, all the new things. It's all freemium, so you don't have to. You can be an addict for free. That's for the first time in history, maybe. Maybe say
you'd have to get the phone to play it, but today in many societies,
I don't know about that because
most parents
you just have to go to school.
You just have to go to school.
We played a lot of games library. In IT.
Actually, I say that I actually just did a workshop earlier today, so I was in the school for the first time, and just you see how like kids. Like, I don't know, 12, and they've all got phones. And I always see that. I'm like, wow, that was just not even in my mind when I was 12. So the barrier is like way lower. And then once you've got it, like you say, it is then free to access that side of the phone. So with games and.
Yeah. And then there's the familiarity, because we're only now becoming familiar with video games as having addictive potential. And so parents and teachers have way less defenses against video games. And we have a lot of defenses around like smoking, drinking, porn. Like we really try to shield kids from those things. So I think most parents also might not prevent their kids from watching porn enough, might be, but that's a nice, interesting actually overlap between the two, because of course the porn is sort of the same. You could also do it for free. You can also access it whenever, but if you get caught doing that, for example, the repercussions are just way higher and your parents will be freaked out. Whereas it's totally fine if you're playing like Fortnite that's very different. Like people don't really see it as problematic. And the fun thing is it also isn't very problematic. I think it's almost always problematic if a 12-year-old watches hardcore stuff online. That's probably not good. But it's really not so problematic if he's headshotting his way through Call of Duty, and which I kind of agree with, because but okay, that's the difference. But then I think the biggest difference is that the amount of time it consumes. Because if you're addicted to cigarettes, say, and you smoke 20 cigarettes a day, and it takes you 3 minutes to smoke a cigarette, then it will take you about an hour smoking cigarettes, and maybe add another half hour in preparing and walking to the place where you smoke your cigarette. But it's like an hour and a half, 2 hours. You're not a video game addict with spending an hour and a half or 2 hours on video games. Like usually most people have to spend like at least more than 3 hours every day, and oftentimes more than 5, 6, 7, 8, or even 10 hours. And you have these gamers who go on gaming binges that last more than 30 hours. So the amount of time that it requires is just huge. And of course, then there's the leveling and all the structure, because let's take another comparison. If you compare it with alcohol or anything that you take it once, you take the substance and you get into an sort of a altered state of consciousness, or you get this high, you get drunk, or you get stoned, but then you've taken it and you don't have to do anything anymore. You can now be in reality. You're drunk in reality, but at least you're in reality. In video games, it's totally different. You have to keep taking, like you can't stop playing the video game because you will break the hypnosis because you're not taking anything. So in video games, what's different is that your addiction is taking place totally within the video game. So you're not interacting with reality anymore. So you can be an alcoholic, but still engage a lot socially and engage and even work. I mean, here in Amsterdam, I have some corporate friends. Sometimes they'll be high on something at work because I don't know what they had to get some deadlines done, and they're still functioning in reality. And in video games, you're just always you're never in reality, and that's actually very significant because there's a huge difference between games and reality, in that in games it's super stimulating because it has many very enticing elements, but there's also a huge amount of things that are missing. like facial expressions, touch, smell, obviously, all those things, but also real threat, like real danger, but a real novelty, like things being able to happen that really, I mean, it's a very predetermined set of things that can happen in a video game. Like in reality, it's like anything might happen, you know. You might be very drunk, but find the girl you fall in love with in the bar all of a sudden, and your whole life changes. Well, of course, you have World of Warcraft marriages, but I don't know.
That's another layer of the addiction, right?
But so the point is more that the video game addiction is a far more intense experience, as in your mind is totally in that game, and that game shapes the mind also according to the rules of the game, which is it's competitive, it's always measurable, it's super high paced, it's getting feedback from everything you do all the time. It's often sexualized. It's short span, like games last 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, 50 minutes, a long game. So that does something to the way your brain works. And that's also what you see, that if you play long enough, your mind will shape itself towards the rules of the games that you're playing. And, and those are different. I mean, not to say that with any other, drug, you don't get into some sort of mindset and mind state, because if you're drunk, that's a very specific set of rules as well. Like all of a sudden you're wobbly and your speech is impaired, but you think it's great. And so that's also but it's a different set of and it
takes place in reality. In reality, it sounds like that's kind of,
and it takes place in reality. So there's still that connection to reality. Also smoking. I mean, you can be a hardcore smoker, but you're fully in reality.
I guess like those things, like in video games, because it's happening in real time, like you said, you're not taking something and then feeling the effects, it's happening in real time, is that any consequences that happen, as soon as you step away from the game, those consequences don't matter. But with other types of addictions, the consequences happen in the real world. So as soon as you're no longer on that high and feeling that kick, those consequences now happen to you. And not your avatar. Yeah,
it's a super good point. That's also why we underestimate video games, because we all know, like, I mean, in the UK, the Lancet had this amazing paper about the harms of the various types of drugs, and alcohol and nicotine were really high up on the chart because they have huge consequences in healthcare costs for the ones who use, but also the ones around them, because you have more violence with drinking. You have more all kinds of disease with smoking, also from people around it. So there's a lot of harm involved. No one gets harmed by some teenager playing video games for 10 hours a day. I mean, he's completely harmless. And so if he would go, I mean, of course, in America, there's this association between maybe the high school shooting and aggression and video games. So different situation, but at least here in Europe, most video game players, I mean, we don't notice them. They're basically gone out of the fabric of reality, and so there's nothing to notice. there's no harms being inflicted. There's no drunk driving. There's no like you said, there's no repercussions for reality, except for the fact that they are not fulfilling their human potentials in their different life domains, which is a shame. But we don't know the counterfactual.
Yeah, but that's not like an immediate thing. I guess to your point, that's not an immediate thing that you'll see.
We don't notice.
Know someone crashes a car if they've had too much to drink, and you'll see if enough people do that, you'll then see you have a problem.
See it.
But if someone's kind of retreating from reality, you won't notice that immediately.
Yeah, so it's really sort of an invisible problem, which is, of course, funny because that's really what a video game addict does. He retreats or escapes into a virtual world where we don't see them. So, which is, I think, a big reason of underestimating video game addiction. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about something you said earlier as well, or like, I don't know, start a conversation around it. And it was, you were talking about like, you know, if a kid's playing Fortnite and we don't see it as like, there's no, like you don't give repercussions for it. Whereas if a kid's like starts smoking or something, like they're going to get punished by their parents, right? I mean, I think video games are kind of used in like just, I think this is just a bad way to parent in general, but like they take it away and then create a bigger reward system by them being like, you can have it back when you do whatever your chores are, blah, blah, blah. And then is that kind of like reintroducing like another layer of addiction to it by creating the game as itself as a reward?
Nah, well, yeah, that's a super complex point that you're raising. I don't think this immediately would pose a big problem, but there's like hundreds of ifs surrounding this question that you asked, because I mean, if the parents are doing this all the time, like continually, then there would be sort of a problem also, because apparently there is no unconditional love here. And it's just really predicated on them doing what the parents want, which is very unhealthy. And something so unhealthy will create frustration within the child, thus setting him up for video game addiction, because a large part of getting addicted to video games, but also all the other drugs, is self-medicating, like taking pain away. So parents who conditionally try to sort of condition their child or with video games, I mean, that sounds a bit unhealthy, and that sounds like such a child would have a reason to self-medicate. So in that sense, you call that negative reinforcement. So in that sense, yes. But it could also be that the parents just do it out of connection with the child. They just see, hey, actually our son, daughter has a real aptitude for, I don't know, playing the piano. And, but he just can't get himself to play enough because he's really into those video games. Let's just let's just intervene a little bit in his daily schedule. He comes home, he's not allowed to play video games, until after dinner. And only if he's played an hour or so of piano. We know he likes piano, but we just want him to, it's a very different situation. I think it's really about how much you are in touch as a parent with your child. So it's not necessarily bad, but I think it's really about how much as a parent you really see the child and you work with the child to, reach something. So,
Cool.
And then one of the things you touched on earlier is the idea of the avatar you create in whatever game world you're in. So I know you mentioned the idea of sort of our self-image within the game. Is that part of your research as well? And how does
it's not part of my research, at least not my it's part of the book I'm writing for sure, because there was in Germany a very interesting study that sort of looked at how brain activity between gamers and non-gamers during a self-referential task. So they were asked to describe either their avatars or themselves, and whilst they were in a brain scanner. And what they found in Germany is that people who, sort of were classified as video game addicts, they had a higher activation of self-referential brain areas than when they were describing their video game avatar than when they were describing themselves. So neurologic.
So you said higher activity in self-referential brain areas.
Yes.
What is that? And
it's the angular gyrus. It's a part of your default mode network. What Tazziii was talking about in the beginning with, I think, was it mindfulness? But it's also part of that sort of circuit. And it's a brain region that's really involved with you keeping up the narrative around yourself, sort of to have a constant kind of self-image, self-referential, discursive thought that we kind of sometimes also really associate with as I. But what you saw in video game addicts is that the brain region that's highly involved with that, because it's always a cluster of regions working together, but that one of the core regions was more active when they were describing their avatar than when they were describing their real self, which is pretty crazy. Because
essentially they're putting more stock into the avatar they've created rather.
Their brain apparently in some factor, in some dimension is, and you didn't see this at all in non-gamers, of course, in people who were not who did game but were not addicted.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's some serious Ready Player One level.
Yeah.
yeah. I feel so disassociated from all of my avatars because they don't have curly hair. So maybe thank you, games industry, for not doing that.
I really noticed this once myself. I was playing Counter-Strike, like this old game that
I remember Counter-Strike. Well, it's still Counter-Strike Go, CSGO. So
yeah, it was 1.6, I think. And I remember I was like 16, and I remember that I was sitting in my the little computer room, and there was sun outside, but I was sitting inside playing the game, and I was walking on this sort of oil rig with this AK-47, being either a counter-terrorist or a terrorist. I don't know. But I do remember that I almost felt
AK-47 is a terrorist weapon. It's always, if there's an AK-47
might have grabbed it from someone you killed.
It's always the terrorist.
Yeah. But I would always grab someone if I were a counter-terrorist too. I would just throw away my M16. But anyways, I felt the warmth. Like I felt the warmth, but I also realized it was the warmth I thought I felt from the game. So I kind of sort of was really walking there. I had this really weird sort of reality distortion where I really thought like, wow, I am kind of there. I mean, obviously I knew I wasn't, but I felt my body kind of taking up reality as if I was the avatar walking there, which felt super strange because it was like, wow, this is pretty, yeah. I mean, it was after I was addicted for like 5 years. I had to go quite far to really, but I really recall that moment that I was like, oh, this is really strange. I really feel like I'm there in that game right now, and there's sun on me. And whereas, yeah, the sun was like 2 meters behind the window. But so that was I'm not sure if any of you have ever experienced that you kind of feel
like you're basically like in the game.
Yeah, there's a lighter version too. Maybe the lighter version, because I think they call it. I think most gamers actually have that. You don't even have to be a video game addict, but many gamers report. This is a UK study, by the way. They report that after games, they can sometimes still hear like auditory cues from the game, or they can see sort of flashes. They call it like, I think, I don't know, maybe there were like mini psychotic game inductions or something. It's not exactly that, but
I have to say I have experienced that, but I'm also going to add something here to say that like I'll experience that from a book or a TV. Like I have a very vivid imagination. Like even if someone describes something that happened to them, I can like put myself in the situation. Even when I dream, like ever since I was a kid, as long as I can remember. You know how they say you can't feel pain in your sleep or you can't die in your sleep? No, I do. I fully die in my sleep and feel like I'm going through a torturous, painful death, and I'm still I don't wake up from it. I just die and then come out of my body and see me dead. So I guess I'm already predispositioned.
Michael, you need to study this.
So it's not just video games. It's just everything. I can read a book and feel like I'm there and like have memories like that I feel like I'm oh no, I read that in that intense book I was reading. So
yeah, I mean, it's also a normal property of the brain in that sense. It sounds pretty intense what you're going through at night.
But I actually don't feel like I have a normal sleep if I don't feel
if you don't
realistic
get
dreams.
in your dreams.
Yeah, I actually have better sleeps if I have a nightmare than. Well, I feel like when I wake up, I feel like better than when I haven't. If I don't dream, I wake up and I'm groggy. So I don't know what that says about me.
I feel there's a lot in there to unpack. I'm not the person to do it, but I know I can see some signs there. So we've got about 10 minutes. So I just wanted to, I don't know if Tazziii, if you have like any last burning question, but I wanted to add something for Michael.
No, I'm good.
Okay. So it was kind of two things. One, I'm kind of interested in from the panel when you talked about the efforts from the video game industry in response to some of these. And because it kind of triggered me when you said the word lobbying, and I always associate lobbying with like something like political and very in all sort of political arenas, but almost it becomes like a caricature when you talk about like US lobbying and stuff. And I never thought about it like from the games industry's perspective. So can you tell us a bit about that? And I've got one last thing we can end on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first right off the bat is that the gaming industry is huge. It's I think this year about like $160 billion, and it's growing exponentially. Also during Corona, gaming stock was the best stock you could buy. It's growing even faster than medical equipment. And so it's a huge industry with, of course, then also huge interests, because different governments around the world are trying to sort of curb in certain video game elements like loot boxes, and then there's China, who just really has even more rigorous kind of law surrounding video games. So of course the video game industry is really trying to push back against these things, and also against like the whole ruling of the World Health Organization, or the decision to make it an official disorder. And because they have a massive interest at stake, because if we all start believing video games are addictive, then of course we would spend a whole lot less time and money on video games, and that's not what they want. So they're really pushing back. And in 2013 already there was a news item that said like, the gaming industry is outspending the NRA, the National Rifle Association, lobbying, which is just
that's amazing. That shocked me.
Yeah, it was only because there were three sort of types of lobbying. And the gaming industry was only outspending them in one of those types. But still, it was like, it's like the NRA. We all understand the lobby of the NRA. It's pretty huge. And so if the gaming industry sort of outspends them 7 years ago already on one of those lobbying sort of forms, that's quite a big thing. And I'd say like it sort of parallels with the tobacco industry, of course, because it took decades, when we already knew that tobacco and smoking had a lot of negative health implications. It still took decades for this to become like an accepted notion. And I think I hope we won't repeat the same thing. And the problem is also that video games, I think if you play 2 hours a day, that's probably healthy. It's probably good for you. It's probably fine, or at least it's fine. There's really a curve where in the beginning it becomes something that adds to your life, and then it becomes something detrimental. Whereas with smoking, any cigarette, there's 70 compounds in there that are carcinogenic, and it's always not good for you. So it's more difficult with video games. But I think the industry is also really using that to kind of make us, to kind of stall the moment where we collectively kind of accept like, okay, there's really a problem with playing too many video games. You can do this excessively, and the industry is out there to make you play excessively, which is also a big point, because there's many studies that show that the most money gaming companies earn comes from so-called whales, and whales are players that play like a huge amount of time and spend
like casino rules.
So they have a vested interest in not making you play 1 hour or 2 hours, because you won't be involved enough in the game, which is usually a freemium game. You need to be more involved, because then that's the moment where you'll start spending. So that's not an open kind of accepted thing at all yet. But if you look at the data, that's, of course, video game companies are interested in making you as engaged and as attached to the game as possible, which I don't think they kind of think, how do we make people addictive? But if you think like, how do we make them maximally engaged and attached? It's the same thing. But they won't ever call it that way. And that's definitely part of a pretty purposeful and conscious PR, or like personal relations branding strategy, that they won't, of course, put it that way at all. Games are just fun. And then maybe just to read one answer of the, it was a response from I think it was EA Sports, but about the classification of gaming as a disorder, and what they said like publicly. So what their statement was that the World Health Organization knows that common sense and objective research prove video games are not addictive, and putting that official label on them recklessly trivializes real mental health issues like depression and social anxiety disorder, which deserve treatment and the full attention of the medical community. We strongly encourage the WHO to reverse direction on its proposed action. So that was their official stance in the beginning of 2018, which is completely bonkers. It's like it kind of says that the WHO knows that common sense and objective research prove video games are not addictive. They're like both are wrong on both accounts. Like it's both common sense and objective research say that video games can be addictive. So I think it's important for people to realize that on the other end of the screen, if you're playing a video game, there's a huge company with a huge interest aiming a really advanced tool at your brain and trying to monetize that. And
I mean, that's kind of...
I like...
Oh, no, I was just going to say that's kind of why I wanted to sort of bring that up, because in many ways, and I think in different stages of the conversations, you mentioned the perception of video games from whether it's parents or whoever as something that's totally benign. So I think it's important to recognize that, like you say, there is an industry behind it, and not to say that the industry is automatically then bad and like everyone in the games industry is bad. It's not to say that, but it's to give the people that play the games like the proper context and what they're sort of buying into, so to speak, with their time, with their attention, and then just being able to make better decisions based on that. So when you see the, because we're in next generation console, so we're seeing all the hype, all the PR from the companies to get an understanding of what's kind of really going on when you do play those games.
Yeah, and what you say is also very relevant, because this is really this goes for the most, like, the biggest commercial gaming companies, but of course the gaming in the whole landscape of gaming publishers is also it's massive, and there's many indie studios and smaller studios and creative studios, and not all of them are trying to make hyper addictive games. Some of them are really trying to make little art pieces and just really fun stuff, and also one of the most addictive games like Fortnite or League of Legends doesn't have to be all that bad. So, but that's the difficulty. It's like there's many nuances. But yeah, I wouldn't attribute this to the gaming industry as a whole, but mostly to maybe the biggest top ones that, I mean, they are just out there to maximize their profit in a competitive market. I mean, they have to compete against all these others.
That's the nature of business. And
it's business, and so their just market logic just also pushes them into making games that are more and more captivating. Unfortunately, they become so captivating that they become addictive. And I mean, I don't think it's their goal to get everyone addicted, all the youths. But if it's their goal to make maximum profit, that's basically the same direction. It's just a different kind of a
I wanted to comment on, I like some of the language that you use about like the addiction potential, rather than it being like video games are addictive. It's video games have addictive potential, which is definitely different from something being addictive. Something being addictive means you have it once and you are that is it, you're done, you're in it. And also was just wanting to make a comment on something I've completely forgot, but I'm going to make a completely different comment now, which is like, I have friends that are smokers. In fact, like a lot of my friends are smokers, because we were like comparing it to nicotine, and they know the risks involved with nicotine. And they all started when we very much knew that like the effects of smoking on the body, and started smoking, knowing that. So it's crazy, like thinking that like the threat is still so there, that it's a risk of how we talk about gaming. But it's like, I mean, you could probably tell everyone that it's going to kill you in 5 years, guaranteed, and people are still going to play games. Like,
that's the thing again with that's very interesting in addiction research, and we haven't talked about that. But your brain, when you start doing something often and more often, your brain will start processing that behavior in a different pathway. It will shift in your striatum. It's a part of the reward system, but the pathways that translate that behavior, they will go in a more subcortical way. So it will be sort of slowly, as you keep on indulging in this behavior, slowly those pathways will sort of sink to a different level where they're subconscious. They override. They go so fast. It's like clip. They don't have to go. You don't have to consciously like light up a cigarette anymore. The same goes also for tying your shoelaces. At some point, you really don't think about it anymore. It takes some time. I mean, we all forgot that we really struggled for a good month or even more tying our shoelaces. At some point, it becomes totally automatic. But also video games and smoking cigarettes, you do it so often, it becomes totally automatic behavior. And you have to consciously then stop the behavior and look at it, but it won't happen automatically. So your default mode will just be to do it and not think about it. So then you have to either hit rock bottom or something before you start to reflect, or you need some intervention from outside, or you just have to think like, oh shit, I'm not fulfilling my potential in here and here. How so? Oh, I'm playing so many video games. Oh, I'm smoking so many cigarettes. Oh, if I want to perform better at something I care about, I should maybe stop doing this or that. But do we want to finish on a positive note about video games?
I was just going to say before.
I feel like I'm always bashing video games, but I kind of like video games too. It's like,
all right, so we're gonna wrap up. So as we do that, so Michael, if you want to give us, as I mentioned, going into a new generation, give us something like the positive aspects of video gaming and what you'd like to see improve going into the next generation of games.
Yeah, so I think there's like I definitely haven't seen all of them, but there's such a huge variety of video games, and I definitely friends of mine are really into those. There's really artsy ones, very realistic ones. There's games that really try to actually make you switch roles and have empathy with other characters, or so there's far richer gaming experiences than just trying to find the best gun and having as many headshots as you can, or building the best army and destroying everyone, which is also fine. I mean, if that's your gig, do it for a while, enjoy. But I would just say, like, the amount of potential video games have for actually creating real significant interactions and in really inspiring creativity, it's all there. Like, that's also possible with video games. So I would just hope that as we become aware of that, some video games have a high addictive potential, and they usually are quite flat. It's just about killing as fast as you can, destroying, command and conquer, and just blah, blah, blah. That there's also different choices, so that people would maybe start exploring different types of games that are maybe more narrative based, or that just provide a more rich, more human, and more challenging experience in many ways. That might all of a sudden a game that might require patience. Oh my God, that would be a crazy thing for anyone playing playing any of the sort of the top 10 or top 20 games. That would be absolutely awesome, because I do think that video games have a massive power. Like, that's what they clearly show. Like, nothing else in the world is capable of captivating the attention of a pubescent boy for hours on a stretch. You know, nothing can do that. That's power. That's like, wow. So, I mean, you can use it for good or for bad. And so I think we should just acknowledge that video games are here and that they'll only grow exponentially, and that we should definitely see how we can make it something that really adds to our lives instead of flattening our lives. Cool. And that's possible. So yeah, I like that. I'm definitely on board for more like narrative games and different experiences. So yeah, I'm with you on that. So you're doing that yourself, huh? There you go. Yeah. So I also have a vested interest in that. I don't have a lobbying group yet, though, but lobbying for you in time. So yeah, no, thank you for joining us, Michael. Yeah, again, it's been like good to hear about your experiences and kind of the research that you do, and just to give that, like I say, that wider picture of what happens when we're playing the games that we play. So yeah, thank you for joining us. My pleasure. Yeah, and yeah, just for everyone's watching, again, like I said at the beginning, we're looking to have more of these types of discussions around mental health, storytelling, other aspects of video games. Our aim is to sort of promote diversity, inclusion, and demystify parts of the industry and this culture. So yeah, thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you at a future event. I should also mention, just before we wrap, that we have a Discord community for upcoming events and activities. We also have another stream next week on Tuesday, the 20th of October.
for Black History Month, where we'll be talking to prominent Black games industry professionals about their work and their impact on this industry. And as we mentioned, narratives and storytelling, we also make manga. So again, our characters are to the sides. I write and self-publish manga-style comic books set within our own universe. So you can check those stories out, including an upcoming kickstarted manga that will be, well, pretty much as soon as I write it and we do the artwork. So that's kind of on board now. We just finished the Kickstarter early this month. So making a start on that. And myself and Tazziii also have our own podcast, Story X Story, where we talk about, no surprise, stories across pop culture. So that's video games, anime, manga, comic book movies, sci-fi, just different stories. We have an episode coming out today, if it's not out already, around Star Wars Rogue One. So you can check that out as well as future episodes. And that's pretty much it for our stream. Once again, thanks for joining us. You can also give us a shout directly if you want to send us an email, feedback@mayamada.com. And yeah, our links are in the chat. They'll be in the YouTube description if you're watching this later. Thank you for joining us. Take care, stay tuned, and stay safe, everyone.
Bye.